Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Catherine O'Lean, Programs Manager at the American Library in Paris. For those of you who are just discovering us, the American Library is the largest English language lending library on the European continent. We're also more than that. We're a vibrant event space, although we've moved to Zoom for the time being, of course, to stay safe. We continue to gather in this fashion. We host a variety of evenings with an author events, such as the one you're about to see, as well as writing workshops and book groups and all sorts of programs. We also have a full series of events for kids and teens as well. We're also an independent nonprofit institution, so we're not supported by either the French or American governments. We instead rely on the generosity of our members as well as our donors. So thank you to those of you in the audience who are donors and supporters of the library. You can learn more about us by visiting our homepage. We also have sort of all the social media accounts that you could ever want. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a YouTube channel where you can see previous events that we've done. So feel free to check those out. All right, so this evening I am delighted to be joined by Fiona Sze-Lorrain. She is one of the rare few English language poets of our times who works across genres and artistic expressions, as well as more than 3 languages or cultures. In this reading, she will present poems from her latest collection, Rain and Plural, and her new translations of contemporary Chinese language and American poets. She will also discuss the role of aesthetics of poetry beyond language and culture in a seemingly globalized yet politically fragile world, and the relationship between her writing, music, art, and life. And I should also add, I see that I just have left that off here, that she was a 2019-2020 Abigail R. Cohen Fellow at the Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination, and she lives in Paris still and co-runs a small independent press, Vif Éditions. So thank you so much for being here, Fiona, and please go ahead with your reading.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine. Thank you everyone for coming to the reading, although it's virtual, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do this while having all of you on a screen. I would like to say that we have tried to have this reading a few times during the confinement, and finally, after 2 attempts, this is the 3rd time we managed to put it on, and so I'm extremely grateful to Catherine for making it possible, despite the imminent lockdown, the 3rd time in Paris. I suppose we always think of poetry as something healing, nourishing, at the same time anguishing and difficult, but I'd like to assure you that poetry is much more than that. It can be fun, even though it's very much interior. I thought reading poetry is always something we turn to when the situation becomes complex or things get difficult. And it seems that's the case because I have heard a lot of non-poetry readers turning to poetry during this time. So that's very comforting to know. But unfortunately, I have to confess that throughout this entire confinement, I've written not a word. Coming from a poet, that's quite an irony, but I've been reading a lot of poetry, but it seems that writing poetry is not as easy. And I say this because I get a lot of questions asking me whether I've written anything. And so I can assure you that the answer is no. This said, I'd like to read some new poems from my new collection, Rain in Plural. The light is not that great. And the first poem in this collection is called More Vulnerable Than Others. So what if I break? I will continue to eat mud, unwind underground, mask banned signs, chew holes in every tall grapevine, breed my roots after a nap, spread fronds as free clothes, free money, lay branches bare for the moon and its jaws, while each flower falls to its own bad dream. So that's my opening poem for this collection, sort of enough to set the pace and the mood. The second poem that I will read, The Problem with Music. I broke my Gujang string by string, yells in astro mode, down a spongy hill, or God knows what splendid historic cleave. Snow did not come to mind when my feet expected it. Suddenly clean, the idea of acting versus its ideology. I watched the aria with a deep breath. From a source of torture, I did nothing, telling myself I must do nothing. So the title, The Problem with Music, is something that I struggle with all the time when I write poetry and whenever I do anything, really. Even when I read, I hear them in notes more than in words. And so for that reason, sometimes silence is better. Anyhow, I should explain that Gujang, what I just mentioned, is a sort of a harp, a 21-stringed harp that I play. I've been a musician. In fact, that's my, what do I say, gagne-pain in French. I often get asked whether music and poetry intersects. In fact, I don't know whether they overlap or not, because I never separate them anyway in the first place. So they're pretty much interchangeable. The next poem, A Matter of Time. And this is for my grandmother who died in 2013. The last time I saw this body chose me. Fiona, it called out loud at sundown, and I remember nothing of what I did. Sometimes I bent close to check if it breathed. In between scenes, 1,000 miles from this ward, crowded yet receding, days when air was still clear, a little raw, a village, primary colors, the kitchen where I memorized idioms and taoqian and love poems, sesame cakes, Shanghainese dumplings to steam with Napo cabbage, a stone house gone in flames on her 60th birthday. What's left behind of the feud reminds me of this body, a wounded horse which must suffer in order to live. Rubble fresh and set apart from the disaster. The body is fighting with the spirit inside it. What would the flesh say? Nothing, it says. It says nothing. Now I touch its skin, the cream of being alive, in decorum, after 3 lives, 4 countries in 9 decades. The past and the present against what comes next. 4 daughters to consult the book and a son abroad. Sweetly or briefly, the impressive cruelty. If soul can't talk to body, each organ divide for prayer before victory. Is there, is there. I can't invent this lack of a last word. Help me with the title. Not in words or grief, or all of it opening to seek relief. Never stay politically naive. The voice returns to colonize my fury. In the end, the beginning unnecessary to avoid anguish. Grandmother, 2 women, facing exhaustion without permission to leave. And I have a shorter poem here. Reincarnated, but not for the first time. This happens when I'm ready for my own flesh. If only the world were as spacious and precise as such a moment, I wouldn't need outlaws and my goddamned pride. I would be able to fix the smooth decline. I've been trying to do things with my ego, and it's very hard to get it smaller than what it is. So Buddhism plays a role in that. The next poem, To Suffering, the Liberation. I addressed you not as twin sisters, but as two fruits hanging from the same branch of a tree, planted by an agnostic farmer. He prayed for harvest in October, asked for a wife season after season, coveting the life of a painter who drew from scratch a still life of two pears in a basket. Simple but climatic, they looked equal, yet dissimilar, recognized by him who planted the tree. This is one of my favorite poems in this collection, and I wrote it in a restaurant in Italy, in Rome, on a rainy day. I don't know why, but that happened. I call that one of those lucky poems. Never once. After visiting a museum igloo with 3 Italian friends, one of them a world-class bridge player, after Heidegger in 5 hours, after a casserole of black pepper crabs fished out of a musical aquarium, after dining with a league of prime brokers, a poet from Taiwan on her best behavior, after hanging up on silence, after an entente between your ancestors, your son and daughter, your biological weapons, after deciding not to become our own parents, after our failure to stay as brothers and sisters, after Kafka, his vegetarian meals, after Mojave or his difficult women, who each became an artist in her own right, after scouting for the best laksa in London, after Lithuania, after loving your neighbors, the diabolical heaven, after the first 2 houses and a transit between 2 wealth-giving planets, after a long sail, after my favorite samurai, after the matchmaker who studied hours, after a cello rhapsody, the dying swan by Pitsiyaskaya, after an easy pregnancy and easier insomnia, after the post-war value system and a more documented abdication, after our dim sum at Shangri-La, even though the oolong tea was served while we quarreled, after an eviction, not a hurricane, after Pope Francis, the year 2013, after reaching different planes of existence during an induced sleep for science and mainstream journalism, after the dismissal of a caregiver, after listening to the last stretch of Callas, her aria and its anti-positivism, after a duel in Umbria in which the maestro lost his secret, after non-thought, non-action via a non-self, non-moment, preferably with some emotion, after every king, his children, and the revised list of queens, plays, and errors, after, après, dopo. In English, the word was used before the Middle Ages, the fall of Rome, and the wound open to interpretation. And I'm going to read also a slightly longer poem, Self-Reliance. To rebirth a tree that weeps in my womb, I heal anger with flower essence, aspen, white chestnut, and mustard. 2 pencils in each pocket. Hysteria and euphoria equal a patent storm. Euphoria and hysteria equal a latent gene. The negative of each sentence is in its translation. 1. The negative of a portrait picture revives a life in 2 worlds, true or false. 2. The negative of a memory can be exposed within hours, true or false. 3. The negative of any number takes into account an emotion, true or false. Read about Snowden, think about his country based on a true story. I exist as a color every other year, a recipe per season. Rain dash, rain dash, rain. Yes, no, yes. Due to my budget, Brecht and Puccini cost a lot less than the phone bill. Femininity, a desire to lead. In his obituary, Plato qualifies green politics. 0 is a state of being and becoming. One takes a long time to get used to it. Accept the strangeness, evasion, a magnetic oval, an abrupt derailment. Accept the newly tested drugs, reclassified data about teeth, lungs, fingernails, the radioactive tubing, and inquisitors run down, amateurs astronomy, commercial fishing, the cultural impact of astrology, Korean sushis, Japanese wine, except the semantic pool of hairdresser, anthologize, suitcase, eclipse, more risk. Earn your catharsis after each night shift. Foot massage, virtual sex. This isn't the last of communism. Have you listened to Clapton, the guitarist, instead of Clapton, the rock artist? You don't have to fantasize. You don't need to drink. Reprisal, to demonize dissent. A patriot checked why for all the questions. I know the patriot, but not his family. His family doesn't know where he lives. I feel braver about infinity. I am visible between 2 mothers. We are creating between liberties. I'm just going to read 1 poem, perhaps 2 more before I move on to some other stuff. This comes in 2 parts and is about Bob Dylan, just so you know. Give up thinking twice. 1. Acoustic. Instead of Cohen, I heard another bard. Some thought him thunder, some found him uphill. So what if rain must fall hard, one grumbled. Cut inside each chord, but surrendered for time. Some thought him thunder, some found him uphill. I listened to each repetition, an apology in the fewest words. Cut inside each chord, but surrendered for time. I would have given up a mountain for the storm. I listened to each repetition, an apology in the fewest words. How long it could last, it might have sensed, when void of its heaven, it must fight its own earth. I would have given up a mountain for the storm. I credited the wind for his cri du cœur, discredited the same wind for his rhythm. How long it could last, it might have sensed, when void of its heaven, it must fight its own earth. How much delirium to be heard as a poem, he did not answer, did not bother. I credited the wind for his cri du cœur, discredited the same wind for his rhythm. To clarify music was not his task. How much delirium to be heard as a poem, he did not answer, did not bother. Some thought him ego, some said he pushed notes off the high-speed reel. To clarify music was not his task. I saw a door when he played harmonica. Some thought ego, some said he pushed notes off the high-speed reel. Green, blue, and a jar. I saw a door when he played harmonica. No one waited behind or outside. Green, blue, and a jar. Times change its size. The door, not his mouthpiece or unplugged version. No one waited behind or outside. I could ring the drums had it not turned his back on us. Times change its size. The door, not his mouthpiece or unplugged version. The troubadour aged fast, not because of drugs. I could ring the drums had it not turned his back on us. I drew this theory from his Nobel Prize, how he took his time. The troubadour aged fast, not because of drugs. Heartbreak can be lean and acoustic, like a piece of meat if mood detained the beast. I drew this theory from his Nobel Prize, how he took his time. Every song, a friend and moon to compete for its chi and wives. Heartbreak can be lean and acoustic, like a piece of meat if mood detained the beast. Sick of the word love, it plagiarized its best failure. Every song, a friend and moon to compete for its chi and wives. Unlike a friend, it did not need to try hard. Sick of the word love, it plagiarized the best failure. Unlike a moon, it spoke through the graves and diaspora. Unlike a friend, it did not need to try hard. Some gave up despair to find its past. Some gave up even when alive. Unlike a moon, it spoke through the graves and diaspora. Years down the road, if words fell apart, this prophecy would ask for one odd star. Some gave up despair to find its past. Some gave up even when alive. None of his demons survived their trance. None of this passion left its hide. Years down the road, if words fell apart, this prophecy would ask for one odd star. So what if rain must fall hard, one grumbled. None of his demons survived their trance. None of this passion leveled its hide. Instead of Cohen, I heard another bard. So that's the first version of it. I'm aiming to memorize it at some point, at least before I die. Part 2, electric. Instead of Cohen, I heard another bard. Some thought him thunder, some found him uphill. So what if rain must fall hard, one grumbled. Cut inside each chord, but surrendered for time. I listened to each repetition and apology in the fewest words. I would have given up a mountain for the storm. How long it could last, it might have sensed. When void of its heaven, it must fight its own earth. I credited the wind for his cri du cœur, discredited the same wind for his rhythm. How much delirium to be heard as a poem, he did not answer, did not bother. To clarify music was not his task. Some thought it ego, some said he pushed notes off the high-speed reel. I saw a door when he played harmonica, green, blue, and a jar. No one waited behind or outside. Times change its size. The door, not his mouthpiece or unplugged version. I could ring the drums had it not turned his back on us. The troubadour aged fast, not because of drugs. I drew this theory from his Nobel Prize, how he took his time. Heartbreak can be lean and acoustic, like a piece of meat, if mood detained the beast. Every song, a friend and moon to compete for its chi and wives. Sick of the word love, it plagiarized the best failure. And like a friend, it did not need to try hard. And like a moon, it spoke through the graves and diaspora. Some gave up despair to find his past. Some gave up even when alive. Years down the road, if words fell apart, this prophecy will ask for one odd star. None of his demons survived the trance. None of his passion levels its height. Now the moon is almost hidden. The stars are beginning to hide. The fortune-telling lady has even taken all her things inside, all except for Cain and Abel and the hunchback of Notre Dame. Everybody is making love, or else expecting rain, and the Good Samaritan is dressing, is getting ready for the show. All right. And here's the last poem from this collection before I move on to some other poems and perhaps translation. Eternity. How does one define spirit without blood to make the body known across a shore so point blank that we see its passing tail? Wands of stone, before a winter moon, the spirit moves from one width to the next height, lighter than the sweet failure of wind and hours and a stranded sail. Spirit, I don't tell myself to control our feud, the random phase of a god who leaves us old, an alley to somewhere hypnotic, prolonged and curved at each turn. When you come, you ask the same question I commit to poor speed. How places grief, poised in distance, while the rest of us die trying to live. When you leave, you offer nothing but the reason to fade that's beyond you to respond to silence. After the cold, when pain outwears pain after quantum physics. I don't tell a soul what to intuit on a peak. I won't tell others how storms heal or stop the countdown, why echoes blink to preserve the drift. I won't paint your dream in this portrait. And here are some poems from the Ruined Elegance. That's my collection before the Rain in Plural. I call Rain in Plural my pandemic book. I have to tell you, having a book out in the year of 2020 is full of surprises. And I'll leave it as that. I wait for the ruined elegance. Plum blossoms comb the southern mountain. Maybe winter, maybe spring. What can the difference give a bystander? If only swallows mend the wind, another way to choose. Tree to tree, grievance by grievance. I watch the sun turn from a sphere to a palace, burning but not disastrous. Soon, or now, my gaze will break. I want to honor the invisible. I will use the fog to see white peaches. And a short poem. Transparent. At first, I had forgotten its color, an umbrella that couldn't open, the aftermath of tears, God's mask, a mangosteen with worms. To turn this ruined thought into a poem, I took out 4 words. So that's that for poems. I think I have a little bit of time for some translations. Perhaps I will read some Chinese translations later during the chat session, but I will read some poems from Mark Strand's Presque Invisible, Almost Invisible. They are French translations of poems written in English. And I will read my translation in French first, and then I will read the original poem by Mark Strand in English. I will read a short one, it's one of my favorites. L'assistant social et le singe. Un jour, j'étais assis dans une pièce avec un singe qui me raconta qu'il n'était pas un singe. Je compris son angoisse d'être coincé dans un corps qu'il détestait. Monsieur, lui dis-je, je pense savoir ce que vous ressentez et j'aimerais vous aider. Traitez-moi comme un singe, rétorqua-t-il. Ça m'apprendra. And here comes the English version. The social worker and the monkey. Once, I sat in a room with a monkey who told me he was not a monkey. I understood his anguish been trapped in a body he detested. Sir, I said, I think I know what you are feeling and I would like to help you. Treat me like a monkey, he said. It serves me right. Well, the normal reaction is to laugh, of course. Zoom is a very novel experience. All right, the last poem, the last translation. Après la centaine. Je voulais faire un grand voyage, voyager nuit et jour dans l'inconnu, jusqu'à ce que, oubliant mon être ancien, j'entre en possession d'un nouvel être, celui que j'aurais laissé m'échapper lors de mes voyages précédents. Mais j'étais incapable de faire le premier pas. Je m'allongeais sur le lit, incapable de bouger, en empruntant, comme font les gens de mon âge, les chemins de la mélancolie. Elle pénètre l'esprit, elle désincarne toute volonté. Elle bannit la raison dès que frissonne le crépuscule. Même les meilleures et les pires intentions dépérissent sous son emprise. Je continuais à fixer le plafond, puis soudain, je sentis une brusque bouffée d'air froid et j'avais disparu. When I turned 100, I wanted to go on an immense journey, to travel night and day into the unknown, until forgetting my old self, I came into possession of a new self, one that I might have missed on my previous travels. But the first step was beyond me. I lay in bed, unable to move, pondering as one does at my age, the waves of melancholy, how it seeps into the spirit, how it disincarnates the will, how it banishes the senses to the chill of twilight, how even the best and worst intentions wither in its keep. I kept staring at the ceiling, then suddenly felt a blast of cold air and I was gone. So that's it. Is that half an hour?
Thank you, Fiona. That was wonderful. I see a lot of people clapping in the background. I'm not sure if you can see them as well on your screen, but I saw laughter. I'm seeing clapping. There was a lot of joy in the room, although you couldn't hear us.
Yes.
Great. Well, would you want to take some questions then at this point, or?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. And so if you do have a question, I invite you to submit it in the chat box and I'll go ahead and read it aloud and we'll get to as many as time allows tonight. I also wanted to draw your attention to the chat box for another reason. I've included a link to Fiona's latest book, so Rain and Plural, which I was reading from in the beginning. And you'll notice that there's also a discount code that attendees of this event can use that'll be valid through the end of next month. So give that a click if you're interested in purchasing a copy. So great. So the first questions are starting to come in here. That's wonderful. And you can send these to me privately as well, or to everyone. Either way is fine. So the first one is from Sarah. She says, I prefer listening to poetry as opposed to reading it. Do you have an opinion of how to best appreciate poetry?
Well, I like to listen to poetry as long as I'm not the one to read it. I love listening to poetry and to hear poetry read by actors. I mean, by that I meant, good actors. I don't mean actors who overplay, overact the poetry. Hearing poets read poetry allows me to listen to their thoughts read aloud. It's pretty much really that it is. That said, sometimes it's better to know the poem rather than the poet. I happen to belong to the category of people, readers, who want to separate a poet from the poem, because I think the behavioral mechanisms are different. So I'm not certain if I answered your question the way you wanted, but reading poetry without hearing the voice is another time space, is your time space. And there's much more intimacy controlled, put it that way. And if you hear poetry, if you listen to poetry being read, it's pretty much a public experience. You share it with many other people at the same time. It's a different thing, pros and cons. I mean, I do both for poems and poets I like. Bearing in mind that poems I like doesn't mean that poets I like. I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy, Emily Dickinson's company. I mean, what I'm going to say to her, right? So, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, we've got another question that I'll get to then. So this one's from Richard, who's writing, what attracts you to the poems you translate?
What attracts me to the poems I translate? The imaginary world, the world that I would like to map from one language to another. This is a difficult question because it's like asking me how I chose my husband. It's a marriage sort of in some sort. I mean, I when it comes to translation, I can assure you that I have marriages and I have divorces as well. I make sure that divorce happens fast and quick, before it goes to the publisher. But reality is hard to control. There's always something that I can go back to all the time when it comes to translations. I mean, for the case of Mark Strand, he was my best friend. He was my oldest friend, and translating him is really pretty much what I believed in poetry and translation, mapping from one language, not from one language, from one poetry to another, one spirit to another. So at some point I will try to write a book about this question. Please wait for me.
Fantastic. Please keep us posted on that project then. That's wonderful. I have another question here from Amira, who's writing, hi, I'm a student at Columbia University in New York, and I hope to become a poet one day. I am curious as to how you end up producing the final version of each poem. Does it take you a long time to polish it, or is it a spontaneous act? Thank you.
Well, I hope you don't hope to become a poet, but you be a poet. That's my first answer. And I much look forward to reading your poems as soon as possible. The next part of the question as to how I end up producing the final version of each poem. What makes you think that each poem once published is the final version? That's my answer. Does it take you a long time to polish it? It takes me as long as possible and as short as possible. I'm not certain about polishing. Sometimes it's depolishing it that makes it a poem. Or is it a spontaneous act? I consider myself a very spontaneous writer. I don't premeditate an experience in life in order to make it a poem, if you see what I'm trying to say. So yeah, that's quite it, I think.
Great. I'm sure Amira is appreciating your encouragement. Yes, she's saying, awesome. Thank you so much for your answer. Great, great. Okay, I have another question here from Lewis, who has written, could you elaborate on after hanging in upon silence?
Hello, Lewis, and thank you for this question. I hang on silence all the time. That's what I do in poetry. That's part of the formula. That's part of my little secret, is to know when to hang up on silence and when to construct it, and or when to go get it. What should I do? I mean, I just hung up on silence.
Are you ready for the next question then?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, perfect. So this one is from Elaine, who's writing, you said you heard your own work in musical notes. Do you also hear marked strands that way and others?
Yes, I do. I think I do know Strand's music to some extent, and it has to do with his body. The same way as for many other poets I translate, for the Chinese poets especially, there is something, the music is not external. It's not necessarily the sound of it, it's the inner music. And that's what makes each verse and each word and each sentence move. There's an inner music, you have to go find it. Obviously, when it comes to translating poems, it's pretty much like interpreting Bach or interpreting music. You have to play it, but you can never be Bach. You have to play it such that it's yours, but at the same time you honor the source of it.
Okay, great. So the next question here is from Deborah. Do you sometimes love poems and return to them often without ever wishing you could translate them or actually doing so?
Do you sometimes love poems, return to them often? Yes, I love poems most of the time, not all the time. Return to them often. Return to them often as in revising them or rereading them.
I think what she's thinking of is if so if you have that attraction to a poem that it's something you're really interested in, are there certain poems that you can love but you don't develop a relationship with, that you don't end up translating?
Very rarely. I mean, if I like something, I would translate it. But I love classical poetry. I just never translate it because it's beyond me, So that perhaps answers a little bit of that question. That have I ever wished I could translate them without actually doing so? So when it comes to Chinese classical poetry, for instance, I wish I could translate them. But I couldn't do that. But then part of me wished that they would never be translated, because that's how the mystery stays as it is. Learn a new language. Otherwise, everything else, everything in this whole world can be solved by just translation. There are just certain things that you can't go to the shortcut or the solution. The problem just has to stay as a problem, and we have to live with it.
So Elaine has another question for us here, and she's asked, I can't help but notice many bookshelves behind you. Can you talk about the importance of living with books, and which came first, living with books or writing?
Oh yeah, it's an illusion, This has to do with the Zoom thing and the camera and whatnot. My apartment is pretty modest, and therefore I gave you the best shot, which is the books. Well, it's half a joke, but I would say that living with books is sort of a burden for me. I had a dream. I mean, I still have a dream. Why did I use past tense? My dream is that, when as I age, I will have less and less books with me. And I want to know when the older I get, what are the books that I would have with me, that would start to reduce to a pile. So I'm pretty much the opposite of people who want to collect. I think of Umberto Eco, which is this like elevators or these corridors going into libraries and stuff. I mean, that's not me. So I would say I live with writing more than with books. I wish I could read much more than I'm able to, but we have only 24 hours, and I need to sleep 8 hours, and I eat 2 hours for 2 hours, and I cook, so that's quite it.
All right, so we have another question here, and it's from Richard, but also seconded by Sarah. So from at least 2 people in the audience are wondering, who are your favorite poets, both living and dead?
Oh, that's a killer question. Actually, the things like my favorite reading materials are Buddhist scriptures. If we consider that poetry, I read Homer every year, Iliad, that's poetry. But that's not my favorite, but I read it every year. I have a problem with favorites, because once I say it out, in 2 weeks from now, it's no longer a favorite. So I'm a bit superstitious about that. I would say that most of my favorites, when it comes to the different phases of favorites, they tend to be rather modernist. The edgy poets, the contemporary edgy, the ones who get prizes and stuff like that. I mean, I go to them I read them all the time, but it's hard to forge a favorite relationship with something that's so current. Not that I don't like it or whatnot, but the notion of favorite is a problem for me. Sorry about that. I think I will answer that question better had it been phrased, what poets would you encourage to read or to revisit or whatnot? But then that again, I've answered the question, so I'm not going to go to it again. So next question, please.
Right, we won't hold you to it. It doesn't have to be exclusive. We'll step away from favorites and appreciate your recommendations in any case. So I'm not seeing any just yet from the audience, but please, again, if you're hanging on to questions, feel free to send them. And Fiona, I might ask one of my own if I may. So I know that you're a musician, you're a harpist. I was wondering if you sort of mentioned in the beginning of your reading and talk tonight how you don't neatly separate, poetry and music or language. These things really overlap for you. How does that manifest when you're playing music? Do you have a sense that the language is also infused into the melody, or is it more so the other way around, that with poetry and the words you hear the melody in the language?
I think when I play music, I just don't sing. It's another sensory experience. It's much more physical, I would say, when it comes to concertizing. You're on the stage on your own, but yet at the same time you're receiving energy waves from an audience whom you can't see and reach, and the audience are right there. Each of them has paid to come and hear you, so the stress is very different. It's very you can't cheat at all. It's a bit like reading poetry, actually. And to tell you the truth, the reason why I wanted to write poetry was, I naively thought that, that I would just be writing and be on my own and just with the page. Never, ever would I imagine that at some point I have to read my own poems, It only struck me after, writing poems and getting them out that, oh, there's something called poetry reading, you have to read your poems. I'm like, again. So I have that sensitivity when it comes to the other side. When I play, when I'm working on the instrument on stage, there's a metaphor that I was given when I was a child, is that you're on the other side of the river and people are right yet on the other side of the shore, and the harp is in between. So you have to go to that side from one shore to the other. And so when you're in that kind of a time space, you don't think about many other things. You just think about how to go there through the sound of it. Words are more complicated when it comes to sounds because they simply would trigger meanings, linguistic meanings, psychological meanings, stories, narratives, or whatnot. The idea really is to shut that down, but yet at the same time entertain them. There's an irony. I'm not certain if I'm answering the question in a very concrete way.
No, you are. Thank you. And I appreciate you sharing that imagery with us. That was so beautiful, talking about the divide between performer and audience. That's really striking.
And I see the next question coming in.
Yes. I'm going to go ahead and read it just so that we have it preserved for the recording, if that's okay, and that everybody can just sort of relax and listen. So the next question is again from Lewis, who wants you to say more about the relationship of words to music. You said earlier when you read, you hear the words in notes, ?
Yes. For instance, there are some words. There's this word, amnesia. I hear a B flat in it. I mean, to me, the amnesia, everyone can pronounce the word amnesia in a different way. Amnesia, whatever, but I keep hearing a B flat in it. So it's a sensory thing. And then when I play a B flat, I see kind of a gray color. When I play, I see a gray color. So I will have to find a way to put all these different experiences in one world. Put it this way, that I'm not interested in writing poetry. I'm not interested in playing music. I'm not interested in telling a story. I'm not interested in painting, doing a painting. I'm interested in constructing a world such that each one of these expressions exists within this world and within a time space. And then they will come together and then they will converge and they can dialogue, they can communicate, or they can reject one another or each other, depending on the time space. I don't know. It's very organic. So in that sense, but yeah, when I do one thing, I concentrate on it. I don't think about how the other thing is going to come in and knock on the door and ask me to, let's go have lunch together. No. So it's one thing at the same time, but many things also all at the same time in a way. The relationship between words and music, really, what links them together is silence. It's the most dramatic thing that can ever happen, I think, when it comes to music, and most dramatic thing that can happen when it comes to poetry too. And for poetry, when you read them, silence is visible. It's not just audible, it's seen on the white pages. So that's interesting.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Fiona, for being so generous to answer all of these audience questions. These have been fantastic. I've really enjoyed this portion of the event too. It allows us to come together a little bit more and kind of, develop that sense of intimacy we might have been sharing had we been in person. So thank you for your wonderful reading as well. It's just been fantastic to host you.
I'm going to just end up with one Chinese translation, since I promised to do that.
That sounds great. And I have a couple of announcements after that as well. So we'll head towards wrapping up here. Thank you.
And this is Karma from Yin Li Chuan, which is a Francophone Chinese writer, a woman, born in 1971, I think. Yes, 71. So I'll read the English translation, which is my translation, and then the Chinese version, just so we can hear. A flower, not my tour de force. I'm best at describing you a spring. I can even let you feel its regrets. But a flower, I don't know what to do with a flower. That's it. 一朵花，一朵花，不是我的拿手好戏。我擅长的是向你描绘一个春天，我还能让你感到春天的遗憾。但是一朵花，我对一朵花毫无办法。Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. And I see people are clapping again, so I'll go ahead and join them. Thank you, Fiona. That was just fantastic. You've been a wonderful guest this evening. So just to wrap up, as I promised, I wanted to offer a couple of little previews about events that the American Library will be hosting very soon. So next week we'll be hosting local author and sort of beloved figure here in Paris, Stephen Clark. So I encourage you to go ahead and visit our programs calendar on our website and see if you might be interested in that. And hearing from him, you can sign up just in the same way that you signed up for tonight's event. And we also have a cooking event. So we're not able to do any samples or anything like that, but we do have Susan Herman Loomis, excuse me, who has spoken at the library before and will be presenting her cookbook for us. We have such a wide range of other really exciting upcoming authors and scholars and public figures of all sorts. So please do check out our programs calendar for any events that might be up your alley. And before I let everybody go, I wanted to remind you that the American Library in Paris is an independent nonprofit and we welcome donations. So if that's something that you're interested in, traditionally in person, we welcome about 10 euros per person per event. You still have the opportunity to give this evening if you would like. In the email that I sent out with the Zoom link, you'll see a link to donate just above that. So please, if you're interested in supporting us, we would so appreciate that, and go ahead and give that a click. And I also, of course, should highlight once again Fiona's book, which I linked for you in the chat at the very beginning there. And if you're missing it for some reason, you can also head to the event page again and find it there, as well as with the discount code. So thank you, everybody. Oh, excuse me there. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see all of your faces. I hope that we're able to gather again soon at some point in 2021. Good vibes for the vaccine. And thank you so much, Fiona. All right, goodbye.